y'all, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. We are Real Estate Elevated, and today's episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What is a shorts edition. We're actually going to be talking about some things you need to do before you put out an offer on the home. In previous episodes, we've talked about what to do during a contract or even things to kind of look out for during inspections, but today's episode, we want you to know what you should be researching before you actually are contractually bound to buy that home. One of the big things is a chance for an appraisal gap. We're coming off the heels of the COVID era where we did see a lot of appraisal gaps. So let me explain what that is. So when you agree to buy a home, you have a list price. That's what the listing agent said the home is worth based on hopefully running comps, looking at comparable properties and coming up with that price. And then the market says, hey, I'm willing to pay this amount, which sometimes can be higher than that list price, especially if you get into multiple offers. But then you throw in a third round of evaluation, and that's the appraisal. So the appraiser might come in at list, at purchase, above, or even somewhere in between. But keep in mind, the reason why this guy is so important is because your lender is only going to base the financing off of the appraisal value. That's the biggest one that matters. So in some cases, you might agree to actually purchase the property for a higher price than what the home appraised. That is called an appraisal gap. So you want to make sure that you understand the likelihood of that before you're on the hook to purchase the home at a higher price than that value. The second one is whether or not there are multiple offers on the table. A lot of times we do see where agents will call for a deadline or say if we go into multiple offers, but there are no other offers. Always make sure that your agent is calling to verify, is there any other competition? Is there a deadline we need to be aware of? Or looking at really hotspot neighborhoods, what's the likelihood of a multiple offer situation? The third one is, like I just mentioned, a deadline for offers. We've often seen deadlines get called pretty quickly, and sometimes you could be in the middle of a showing when a deadline gets called. So it might be wise, especially in those hotspot neighborhoods, to call ahead, talk to the agent, and make sure there's nothing that's been put out there that maybe you've missed. The fourth one is agent responsiveness. So I've mentioned a few times that calling that agent and verifying info is a great tool and trick to use. It's also a great way to get to know who you're going to be in a contract with. A lot of people think that real estate agents maybe don't like each other or there's some kind of competitiveness, when actually the best transactions are the ones where you get along with the other side. It helps everybody move to the closing table, which is the ultimate goal. You also want to look at those disclosures. So making sure your RPODs, your residential property disclosures, are completely filled out. Investors often will check no representation down the entire side because they've never lived in the home and they can't attest to whether or not the property is in ship shape. However, most sellers, on the other hand, should be able to verify yes or no. There are a few situations where maybe they're just not aware if there's been any previous damage or issues, but for the most part, you should have a pretty comprehensive look of the property from top to bottom. And then the last little group, this one's really important, but it does have some layers to it. Looking to see if the home is in a flood zone. That's going to require some future insurance that may make or break that monthly payment. It also can potentially be an issue when you go to resell the property. Make sure you, again, trust but verify. I've actually seen some properties that were listed as the homeowner does not need to carry flood insurance. Well, the reason they didn't was because they had paid the property off. It was not that it was no longer in a flood zone. So just keep that in mind. Another one is whether or not there's construction nearby. You might see a beautiful farm off in the distance that you feel like you're going to get to watch those horses run until the day that you sell the property, when in fact a developer may actually own the future rights to that property. So always make sure you're looking at planning and development as well as your GIS map to see who owns stuff around you. Another one is graveyards. So keep in mind, a seller only has to disclose if one exists on their property. But lo and behold, you turn to the right and you notice there's one on the lot next door, or it could be completely isolated on its own section of land. Keep in mind that sometimes it's good to do that 360 panorama to look at all angles, because I guarantee they're leaving that out in the listing photos. Another one is mixed use zones. So sometimes if you're close enough to an urban environment, you might get into what's called mixed use, meaning it's a blend of residential and commercial. Again, this is not necessarily a good, bad, or indifferent thing, but something to be aware of because it could change the dynamic of the neighborhood, as well as future use and resale. So these are just a few things to be aware of before you lock into a contract, or to help you craft that contract in the best way for you and your family. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. All right, y'all, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like, share, and follow us on Instagram as well as YouTube. We're also on Apple Podcasts. Again, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate.